Okay. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. Some familiar faces here. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you can hear me okay. If somebody wants to write in the chat, kind of a thumbs up. Always on Zoom. Yep, great. Always on Zoom, you gotta make sure that the audio is working and the video is working, and all of us know this well. As more people are joining, just a brief introduction for myself, because some of you don't know me. So my name is Tal Lazar. I have been working as a cinematographer for the past 2 decades, making movies in the United States. Some of you are, I know, coming from, not from the States, you're from Europe and Asia. So thank you so much for coming at this weird time of day for you. So yes, I've been working as a filmmaker, as a cinematographer for the past 15 years. I worked as an educator for film schools such as Columbia University, the American Film Institute, Sundance Collab, Berklee College of Music, and other schools. And actually, before I did all of this creative stuff, I started as a software developer. I was in tech. And in the past few years, I also led a tech startup, led a production company. So I like to think that I bring all these things together, the movies, the education, the technology, the business leadership. And today, we're going to be talking about cinematic impact, right? So basically taking this wisdom of movie making and applying it to other things. Before I start, just kind of housekeeping a little bit. All of you probably noticed that you can't unmute yourself. This is by design. It will be lifted, this ban at the end. Don't worry, we're very democratic here. But this kind of first half is going to be primarily me talking. If you have a question, and I hope that you do, then please write it in the chat, and we'll get back to it later. Everything is very small on the screen here, so I'm probably going to have to switch glasses to read your question. But at the end, there'll be time to ask any question that you might have, and looking forward to having a conversation with you. Also, at the end of this entire thing, I'll be sending to you sort of like a summary, really the framework, the deliverable of what we're talking about today, so that you can apply that yourself. So very important, if you don't get anything from me in the next 24 hours, which includes also a link to playback this video, it might be in your junk mail folder, because I haven't communicated with many of you. There's about 100 RSVPs, so this will also go to playback to some people who, the time zone doesn't really work out. So please make sure that you look in the junk mail folder in a day or so to make sure that you don't get that you actually do get access to this material that's sent to you afterwards. And at the end, I'll also mention that if this is interesting to you, that I'll be looking forward to having one-on-one conversations with some of you. So listen carefully as we talk about these things. I'm sure that many of you will find it relevant to what you do, the business, even if you are not running a big business. And if you want to have a one-on-one conversation with me, then I'll pick about a couple of people who will answer that email to have private meetings with them. No commitment, nothing. This is all kind of just for us to get to know each other and for me to help apply the cinematic impact to your business. And so all that at the end. So yeah, let's get this going. I think I did all the housekeeping. And the one thing I'm going to ask you now is to think about a message, something that you would like to say if you had the opportunity to stand on a stage in front of 1,000 people. Let's put aside the terrifying aspect of doing that and just having the opportunity to deliver a message to so many people. What would that message be? Like to sell something, introduce yourself, increase exposure to what it is that you're doing. What is your goal? What would be that message that you want to deliver to an audience? That is kind of where we start, just putting it in the back of your head, because we'll get back to that. It could be anything, really. The only criteria is that it has to be a message to an audience, because we're taking wisdom from movies. Movies are designed to communicate something to an audience, to a lot of people. So it's not a one-on-one message. What is it that you want to say? We'll get back to that later. So let's go into cinematic impact. And what actually is cinematic impact? The answer to that begins with movies. So I'm going to put some images in front of you to kind of get the creative juices going, and also to really feel what cinematic impact is. So here we go, as I'm describing it. These movie moments probably are familiar to you. And when you remember watching it, or if not, you can just look and see what it evokes. What kind of sensation, what is the emotion that is being delivered by these movie moments, right? So try to remember as you're watching these images. And the interesting thing with cinematic impact is that the answer to everything is actually with the viewer. You don't need to be an expert in making movies to understand the type of impact that movies make. This is the interesting thing about it. And when I talk about a cinematic impact, there's a definition for this. It's, I don't know if it's very complicated. Basically, an inferred emotional message delivered coherently across mediums that resonates with an audience. Okay, maybe it is a little bit complicated or sounds complicated in the beginning, but rest assured that we will break it down and you'll see that not only that it's simple, but that you can apply that yourself. So before we kind of jump into the components of this thing, let's take a step back and, why movies? What's the big deal with movies? There's many art forms, art there. Why are movies so relevant to the type of messaging? And again, what are we talking about here? Messaging. It's anything that you want to say that resonates with an audience. Selling products, introducing yourself, pitching to investors, anything that has an audience. So what is it about movies that makes it so relevant? Well, movie directors are sort of in a weird place. They need to orchestrate this collective of artists in many different fields, right? There's set designers and sound mixers and cinematographers and performers, actors, stunt performers, editors. I could go on and on. There's many of these different artists. But most directors are actually not experts in these fields. Some of them very, very technical. They're not experts in these fields themselves. Sure, over the years, they start learning and understanding these fields themselves, but they'll never be as good as a sound mixer who's been doing it their entire career, and composer or an actor. So the thing with movies is that directors who sometimes they don't even write their script, need to take the story, apply an interpretation, their vision to this thing, and then lead many different artists, technical people, into a coherent thing that all of them sort of say the same thing. And this is unique to movies as an art form, but actually it's not unique as a profession. This is something that we all need to do ourselves. Let's say as business leaders, a CEO of a company has a vision, and they need to have, web designers, product designers, interior designers of a store, anything, actually be consistent with that vision and that messaging. And of course, they can't be experts in all of these things themselves. So how is this done, right? This is the answer that takes us to cinematic impact and also makes this thing relevant to what you do. And again, I want to remind everybody, I know there's some people who attend this who are not leading huge businesses and are maybe self-employed or doing really things themselves, filmmakers, designers, and so on. This applies to you too, because ultimately you are speaking with an audience too. And you could be a filmmaker, but you still need a website, right? And you still need to brand yourself and market yourself, things that I know as a filmmaker, I kind of start getting tired just thinking about these things because this is not my forte. This is not what I want to be doing with my time. And that's exactly the same thing like a movie director. So how can cinematic impact be extended beyond movies? Now, I'll sort of break it down to that definition that we had earlier, and you'll see how it all comes together to deliver that message in a cinematic way, whatever that message that you have is. So I'm going to make it big on the screen so you can see it, but I'll toggle it on and off. So first of all, an emotional message, right? What is an emotional message? When we talk about messaging or anything that you want to say, we usually focus on the text. The text is what you're actually saying. But in the world, people usually don't say what they mean, right? Think about it. This is normal everyday stuff. You really like somebody, you're not gonna just walk up to them and say it. You're gonna go around. You're gonna talk with them about all sorts of things. Just the mere fact that you're approaching them or talking with them is already a hint to the fact that you like them, right? So we are actually very used to uncovering these emotional messages that are hidden. Call it an inferred emotional message. So when we talk about any type of messaging, any type of thing that you want to deliver to an audience, many times the mistake is to focus on the actual surface that you wanted to say and not on the subtextual message. And the difference between them is probably the most important part in this entire thing. And when I teach filmmakers, we have an entire class devoted just for that one thing. And I tell them, listen, forget about the entire semester. If this one thing gets through, and that's the one thing that you remember, then that'll make all of the difference. So the difference between text and subtext, between story and plot. We'll talk about that some more. This is probably the most important thing. Beyond an emotional message is delivering it across mediums. So again, this is not just about images, even though I'm a cinematographer and we're talking about visuals. Mediums are text, music, acting, websites, interior design, performing on a stage, you speaking with somebody or speaking on a stage. All of these are different mediums. And the idea is to take that message that we want to say and apply it to different mediums so that they're all coherent. And that's an important thing. Then we have understood by the entire audience. This is a tough one. Think of yourself sitting in a movie theater. You're sitting with 200 other people. And most of the time in movies, the characters, like in real life, they're not really saying what they're thinking. And yet you know exactly what they're thinking. And everybody around you knows that too. And there's proof. I show it. I show images. And everybody knows, even though it's subtextual, how is that magic happening that everybody just knows, right? We need to be able to deliver that. You start seeing that the bar is actually pretty high. It's not just walking up to people and telling them something. There's a lot of things going on here that we can apply. And ultimately that it's inferred and leaving a lasting impression, meaning inferred that it's hidden, that message. And a lasting impression is that feeling, the memory. When I showed you the images earlier from the different movies, and maybe you remember watching The Matrix or Titanic or any of these movies, and they made an impression of you and it threw you back to that moment. We want to be able to deliver messages like that, right? So all of this together is the cinematic impact. That's the kind of messages that we want to deliver. And what if I'm able to deliver that kind of message in my investor pitch, or when I'm selling myself or a product or anything that what your message is? Can I take that wisdom from movies and apply it to what I want to say? The answer is, of course, yes. I want to start with the important thing, which is this difference between text and subtext. Maybe some of you are familiar with this iceberg visual, right? That sort of came from Hemingway in many ways, that the surface is just the beginning. It's just the tip. And actually there is a world underneath that's hidden, and what I call the visual story. Not because it needs to be communicated with images, but because images can be helpful in finding it and ultimately expressing it, even if we want to deliver it over text and music or products or whatever it is we want to do. That is the one thing. How does it come into play? How does it actually look like? Well, I'll give you an example from advertising. Yeti is selling bags, right? But I think you'll agree with me that this ad is not about bags. I mean, there's a bag here, but it's not about bags. The ad is about adventure and possibilities, right? This is the inferred emotional message. You're looking at this and you think about an adventure, you think about traveling and whatnot. The association created is between a bag and those feelings. Or even more indirect, Nike. Shoes, right? Well, where's the shoes? This is from their website. This is about ambition. So now the association is created from a product, from shoes, to, again, an emotion, something completely different. This can be applied to pretty much anything. Take Christo a designer, I think, originally, who's helping businesses now. And you know what? Instead of me telling you what the inferred message is, let's try this out now. The truth is what you feel. There is no wrong answer, because that emotion is what you feel when you look at an image or listen to music or anything. So I'm throwing it back at you. Look at this image and write in the chat. What's the inferred emotion? What do you feel that is being communicated here? What do we know about Chris Do? Describe him in even one word and put it in the chat. What would that be? Can-do attitude. Great. Now, the interesting thing, by the way, is that after you write what you write, look at what other people are writing. This is where the magic happens. And I'm doing this live, right? Can it be that the entire audience roughly understands the same thing? So I'm going to put it big again, and so you can see. I'm going to see, okay, attitude, snark, no idea where it is. Well, Melvin, that is actually great, because then you're not contaminated with any preconceived thing. Just look at this thing and be like, okay, well, what do I know about this guy just from this one image? Goofy, fun, confidence. Two people write confidence. Cool. You can already see that there's stuff that's in common between what people are writing in the chat. And that's what I'm talking about. This is sort of like, there's like his name here. There's really nothing. How can it be that two people wrote confidence? Like, of course, he's trying to sell his courses. That's what actually is happening. But think about that. If, Peter, if the message was, the entire thing was trying to sell courses, right? You would see, there wouldn't be any picture maybe, or something that's like, here, courses. That wouldn't really be interesting at all. What's interesting is that he chose this blue background and that people are writing, sure of himself, Victoria. Great. It's like, that's kind of the confidence. So how can it be that confidence is communicated? And if I wanted to communicate confidence in my pitch or in something that I want to do, could I do that? Well, if Chris Do can do that with one page on the website, then I'm sure we can do it too, right? And that's what we're talking about today. That's the kind of impact that we're talking about. And companies do that all the time. This is, Samsung Galaxy S4 in 2013. They did a Broadway show. They actually took it to storytelling. They did a whole production. And of course, if we're talking about product launches, you can't not mention, the master, Steve Jobs. If you want to see somebody on a stage applying these principles, this original 2007 announcement of the iPhone. But this can be applied to any business thing. Client testimonials, that's an actual video, so maybe that's a little bit close to home for me. But how about interior design? These are the offices of Spotify. Look at this, and what is the inferred message here? What is the design of the office? If you would walk into a place like this, what do you feel? And again, you don't need to be an interior designer. This is the beginning of how we actually approach it. How, let's say you would work with an interior designer without being an interior designer. You just need to know what you want. And what you want is not furniture, right? That's the text. What you want is the inferred message. If you can articulate that, then it can be expressed also in interior design. So that exists in Spotify here too. So this brings us back to cinematic impact, right? So cinematic impact, an inferred emotional message delivered coherently across mediums that resonates with an audience. And now it's really just a matter of asking, how? How do I get that done? If Chris Do can do it with one image, then I should be able to do that too. I don't need Spotify's budget, and I don't need to be Steve Jobs on a stage. You can get that done. And you actually only need 3 things. And this is sort of what we gathered here today for. The 3 things that you need are a visual story, a director's vision, and cinematic language. These are the 3 things. So let's go over them and see how we can get them and apply them to your message. Ready? Okay, here we go. Visual story. A visual story is a character's journey of transformation. In movies, characters experience change. They learn something, they make decisions, something is happening, and they never end the same way. Even if physically they're in the same place, they're different as a person. So the first question is to ask, who is the main character of your story? Now, many people think that, well, I'm telling the story, then I'm the main character. But that's not really the case. You are the storyteller, a very important persona in this whole equation. But the main character for your story is actually the person listening to you. So now you have to ask yourself, how do I want that person, the character, to change when my message makes its impact? And there's examples for that in movies and everywhere, right? So here's an example from a movie. It's a scene from The Man Who Wasn't There. I'm just showing you a still here. Great movie, by the way. I love giving examples from movies, not just like important, boring movies, but actually fun movies to watch. The Man Who Wasn't There is one of them. And you see two people here, one in the bathtub and one standing there. And the piece of information, context that you need is that they're married. So that changes things a little bit, right? Many people describe their relationship as, a little bit tense, I would say. And if you had to say something about this character, then it would be a little ominous. And there's maybe even an undertone of violence here. So this is the transformation, the change. You know that they're married, that they have a relationship. So you assume, well, they're together, so everything's okay. But then it kind of goes into something bad. This continues. It exists in all sorts of places. This is from The Last Emperor, another excellent movie. Wedding Night. Doesn't feel very festive, even though red in this context is a very, very festive thing. It's washed with red, but here use of color and this kind of like framing and everything makes it look very staged and frozen. And that's the inferred message. It's not this kind of like emotional or passionate or something that you would expect from this moment. Here is a picture by Irving Penn of Miles Davis. And if you had to write one word describing this, what would it be? Write in the chat. What's the inferred message? One word to describe this. What would it be? Passion. Intense. Great. Soulful. Look at this. This is another passion. Love. You see? This is when you are, and notice, by the way, that I'm asking you for one word, because if I ask you what's going on here, you may say, well, Miles Davis is a musician, is holding his trumpet and all that stuff. But if I try to condense it, what's the essence? It has to be a single small thing. One word is the best way. And people are already still writing here, and it's great stuff. And again, read what other people are writing, and you notice that there's something in common between all of this. One image. There is no magic here, just an inferred message. Okay, so we know this exists, right? It's proven, it's there. How can we find it? Here's a method. I use something that I call a story prism. Just a triangle. But you can use this yourself, and this is kind of the stuff that I'll be sending you later, the methods of how to apply this, so you don't need to necessarily memorize what I'm giving you now, and you'll also have a playback recording of this. It's going to be on YouTube, and I'll send you a link. So let's just get to the kind of like the underlying principle here. What's the story prism? You draw a triangle, and the triangle is describing the story of the character, and we now know who the character is. The character is somebody else. It's not us. At the bottom of the triangle, I'll write the plot. In movies, the plot is what's happening, right? So it's sort of like Miles Davis is holding a trumpet. That's what's happening, right? This guy is standing at the doorway while his wife is taking a bath. A married couple is sitting on the bed. This is like really surface stuff. No emotion at all. If I was selling something, it'd be like, well, somebody is buying my product. Right? I'm writing that thing at the bottom. Believe it or not, this is where we started, meaning that if I asked you, what is the message is, well, I want to sell something, right? I want to say this. I want you to know this, all that stuff. So that we write that at the bottom. And then we go into the transformation. So I'm going to make it bigger so you can see. On one side, I write the before. On the other side, I write the after. So how do I want the character to change? It starts in one place and it ends in another place. So I'll write all sorts of things. I'll give you an example in a moment. We'll make it concrete. after I've written all the different changes for the character, I pick the most impactful one, the most profound one, the emotional one, and I make it into my story. So let's see how that works for example, if I'm selling a jacket, right? Let's say I'm selling a jacket, so my plot would be a person buys a jacket. That's pretty simple. And if I'm selling a jacket, then one big change is that they're going to go from cold to warm, right? Because it's a jacket and it's warm. But I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm going to list all of the things that happen, that change with this person when they get my jacket. And I'm going to start with, the simple stuff, and I'm going to dig deeper and deeper and deeper until I get to the real things that I want this jacket to represent. Now, this is not just a jacket. This is an adventure. You're going into a different world. So I'm going to say that you start with a monotonous world, monotony, and you go into adventure. And this sounds pretty profound. It's the most emotional thing I've written here. So now I'm going to write it as a story. An explorer leaves monotony to go on adventure. I don't call them a person anymore because now I'm inspired. I'm calling them an explorer. And again, this is not very complicated. And it takes a little bit of time of practice, but you can definitely do that. Here is some ads from the North Face. And I think that you'll agree with me that they embody that kind of message. Look at the environment. It's monochromatic. It's blue or there's not a lot of color in that street. That's the mundane environment. And the jacket is the color. It's the fresh air that comes in. That's the adventure. So that's how story turns into an image, right? But that's not all, right? It's only one element. I need to find my story. It's very, very important. But if you give, that's in movies, if you give two directors the same story, you'll get two different movies. Think, Tarantino and Spielberg. Give them the same story. I think you'll agree with me, you'll get two very different movies. So you need a director's vision. Vision is a big word. People are afraid of this word. It exists in movies, and it exists in business. What's your vision? Those of you who have had to write a vision statement and all that know that this is usually daunting because there's not a lot of guidance. There's a lot of articles about this online, but they're all dealing with the surface. They're not letting you access really what a vision is. A storyteller's unique interpretation. And this is where identity comes in. The reason why Spielberg and Tarantino make two different movies from the same, let's say, script is because they're two different people with two different backgrounds and two different creative visions and so on and so on and so on. It's who you are that matters. You need to inject your identity into this. Well, how do you access identity, right? This is now becoming really, really, really big. We'll borrow again from the world of movies and use something called a vision board. What's a vision board? Remember that we've had the character transformation, right? So I'm picking the before and after of that emotional state of the character that I wanted, and I'm putting it on the vision board. Before, after, let's take my example from earlier, monotony and adventure, right? And now, here's a great way to use images. But I have to say that images are only one way to express a vision. I've had directors, I worked as a cinematographer, and I've had directors who express their vision to me by taking me to a cliff in Los Angeles, overseeing the city, just to experience the feeling. Or send music to me so that I can understand how it feels. So we're talking about feelings here. You can use anything to deliver that. We use images because images are actually universal. We're all experts. Research shows that the whole thing about visual learner and verbal learner, that doesn't exist. We are all visual people. Even if you can't articulate yourself in images, even if you draw like a 3-year-old, you are an expert at interpreting images because you've been looking at them your entire life. So when I ask you about monotony in images, you will think of something. And that thing you think about is going to be different than what another person thinks about. So we're accessing your identity and your preference, your taste, your style through images. And we're just putting them on the board. Whether it is the transition, in this case from monotony to adventure, or monotony alone, or adventure alone, and something is created. This mishmash of images is created. And already, by the way, if you work with designers and you're not a designer yourself, this already is useful. You can take this vision board to your designer and say, this is how I see it. And already you skipped a lot, because from words to images is really difficult. I know we have some designers here. I'm sure they'll agree that it's a lot of fun to look at something like this and now extract the vision from it. So this is already useful in a very, very practical way if you work with web designers, designers of all sorts of whatnot, cinematographers, videographers, any person who's dealing with images. But that's not really the only purpose of this. With movies, when we do this, we actually print it out and we put it on the wall, so we keep maintaining our mindset of our vision of this thing that we're in. And our job now is to take this visual interpretation, like this is my visual interpretation, how I see monotony, adventure, and the transition between them, and apply it to other mediums. That's working great with images, but how do I turn that into text or websites or a package for a product or my pitch for presentation for investors in a presentation and so on? How is that done? Well, for that, you need the third element. And the third element is cinematic language. And the key word here is language, because we're talking about communication. It's not a regular communication. It's a communication that resonates with an audience across different mediums, but it's still communication. And the important thing to remember is that we have this thing to say that can be said in many different ways. Think of the way that I would say chair in different languages. No matter the language that I use, it'll still be a chair, right? So your vision and your story needs to be delivered in different languages. And the languages here are the different mediums. And you don't need to be an expert in these languages, like a movie director. You need to just be able to be in charge of that transition. And for that, I use what I call a cinematic compass. What's a cinematic compass? I draw this circle and I write my story the way that I had it, including my vision. And my vision, if I can't articulate it in words, it could be just that board that I printed and have it nearby. And then I start listing all the different mediums that I have that I want to express it with, right? So for example, what do we have here? We have writing articles for thought leadership, let's say, or producing video ads, photographs, presentation, even writing emails, because I want my internal communication to reflect the kind of persona that I'm embodying, the vision that I have as a leader, all these different things. And now I basically have two possibilities, right? One is that I can outsource. I can hire somebody, a designer or a copywriter or a web designer and so on, and they will do it for me. And now all I need to do is to use my story, use my vision, and talk with them in a way that they will understand what it is that I'm after. This collaboration is very, very complex. It takes years to master. Filmmakers, by the way, this is probably the number one issue at film school. It's not the technique. It's not the vision. It's not, story. We can get it. It's the collaboration. It's to put people together in a room and have them talk in the same language. So I'm not going to presume to get into that in this short session today, but know that the transformation of how you think of something into words or any other medium that you use to express yourself is where the secret is. And there's a reason why directors took me to a cliff and played music to me and whatnot. There is nothing off the table. You can articulate that in any way possible. So one way is to bring other people to do it for you, because you're not a designer, you're not a coder or anything like that. And that's completely fine. And the other way is to do it yourself, right? So if you're a kind of one-person show, solopreneur, or if you actually know how to design and whatnot, then now the question would be, how do I apply all of that into creating images? The images that you already have can be used for that. Here, by the way, is where I would recommend to use AI, something like ChatGPT. I've had some amazing results, basically saying, this is my story, this is my vision, and this is what I want to say. Let's say I write an email and I write it in the driest way, which is probably how I normally write, which is kind of like something nobody will want to read. And then I tell it, how would you apply this story and vision to this text? And what you get back is yours. You gave the content, you have the emotional inferred message, and you have the vision. Many times it's not like, classic AI. It's not exactly what you want, but it will already get you much, much closer. So I do recommend that you give it a shot. AI is great in piecing things together and transforming much more than generating out of nothing. And if you're doing this yourself, then I recommend that you give this approach a try. Here is an example from the North Face of different mediums. It's hard to see it in a slide like this because one of the things is a video here, but remember that we're not looking at the text anymore. We're not looking at the script. We're looking at the inferred emotional message, and that is undercover, right? What's in common between all these different things that is emotional, that the way that makes you feel, like looking at the ad or visiting the store, right? And you'll notice that maybe you have a critique, and that's completely fine. You can have critique without being an interior designer because you are an expert as the person who's receiving the message. The idea is that you will walk into the store and you will feel the same thing as when you're watching the ad or the video or visit the website, that it's all consistent. And since you have emotions, you are human and you are experiencing these things, your opinion matters. This, by the way, is why they bring in focus groups. The biggest directors in Hollywood do test screenings. They bring in audience and they have a moderator come in and questionnaire and so on and so on. The person to listen to is not the expert designer or the expert filmmaker. The person to listen to is the audience. So this is closing the loop, and where you come in and your expertise as an audience will actually enable you to create cinematic messages. Okay. Wow. I talked a lot for about 40 minutes. So, I hope that, this kind of resonated. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. But basically we are sort of at the end. I want to remind you that, first of all, you can reach out to me. This is my email. It's not going to go to any robot. It gets directly to me. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I do want to apply this with your message. And there is any message really, right? It's a company as big as some conglomerate corporation that is doing internal messaging and trying to motivate people, or doing investor updates and whatnot. All of these are messages for audiences, or startup and growth stage that is needing to have a message to investors that they're kind of need to hire people and so on, or early stage startup that recruiting investors, and it could be just one person who's trying to sell themselves, their product, their service, or whatever it is. As long as you're talking with an audience, you can utilize cinematic impact. I will send, we'll get into questions in a moment. So think if you have any question. Also, this is where the message that I asked you to think about earlier comes into play. Think of how this connects with that message, with what you want to say. I want to remind you that once I send that email with the recording and the actual framework, you'll get the PDF, you'll get all the information. Reply to that email with a very short paragraph. Just tell me who you are and what you do. I'm sure that I'm going to get quite a few. I usually do. So, I'm going to pick 2 or so from the messages, and we'll schedule a one-on-one session and see how we can take all this stuff and apply it to you. So that's it. I'm going to allow questions now. We'll have a little bit of time. We have just a few minutes for that. So let's see. You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. You can raise your hand. You can just unmute yourself if you want. We're very democratic here. Or write in the chat if you have any question at all. I know it's a lot for kind of to start, right? So, okay. I got a question here, but for that I need to look closely. Okay, so Christine, for many of the examples you've given are relevant to larger businesses who are developing a brand. I run a marketing agency, and many of my clients are solopreneurs or self-employed creative professionals. How is this cinematic storytelling relevant for them? This is a great question. I know some of my former students are here. I see you, Melissa, and we'll get to you right after this question. I know some of my former students who are filmmakers are also watching this, and this is relevant for them. We talked about branding in the North Face and Nike, but what if you're only doing it for yourself? So first of all, think of how you sell yourself as a self-employed person, right? You put on a website, you have a portfolio, you have a CV. These are the different mediums that we talked about earlier. Each one of these things is a medium. Now, you might be a filmmaker, but you're not a website designer, right? So you're dealing with the same problem, having to communicate something effectively to an audience. The audience is those anonymous people out there who you want them to understand who you are and hire you, but you are not an expert in branding or marketing and web design and so on and so on. So think for a second about how you hire. And we've all hired. It could be, a repair person for our apartment. We've all hired people. And we're all limited with resources when we hire, right? So we can't just go all the way top to the ladder and say, well, I'm just hiring the best. We hire kind of as much best as we can, but usually there's options. So how do we tell the difference and how do we make that decision? Immediately you go to the inferred message. You go into trust and confidence and all sorts of things that are not related to the competency of that person. You may have 5 people who are very, very competent in what they do, but you trust one more than the other for some reason. Who knows why, right? So this is relevant to people hiring you too. And in movies, and this is sort of the type of relationship we want to create with our clients. In movies, when a director finds a cinematographer they like, they work just with them. There's many, many examples for this of directors who work with the same cinematographer. Spielberg with John, with the composer, and so on and so on and so on. So that's the kind of business relationship we want to have with people. We want them to love us so much that they keep hiring us again and again and again. So how do we communicate that? Now we're back to story and vision and all of these things. It's not about the product. Let's say that I'm a designer and I design logos. The message now would be, I design logos. That's not very effective, right? That's nothing. I need to get under this, and how do I deliver that? So that's, Christine, how it's relevant to solopreneurs. They need to go through the exact same process. And sure, you got to ask yourself, what's the product? How do I want to change the person who works with me? These are great questions that you need to ask yourself as a business leader and when you treat yourself as a company yourself. Okay, Melissa. You have a question. Can you unmute yourself? If you can, go ahead. Ask away.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the webinar. My question is about having that cinematic impact in different ways. So, documentary versus fiction, and then versus also the element of, for example, I was fundraising for a GoFundMe. I tried to, didn't reach my target, but that has an element of storytelling. So, how do you know the different bits to hit to still hit the cinematic impact regardless of which medium you're doing it for?
That's such a great question. And, you're doing documentaries, you're a filmmaker, that's a product that you want to create. We'll focus on the second part of the question, because filmmaking, I'm hesitant to go into this because if you have 4 hours, I'll just talk about movies. So, I'll be disciplined. And let's talk for a second about GoFundMe and raising money for a project, right? This is your movie that you want to make. How do you get them to give you that money or to support? Well, the question is really, why would they do that, right? What is the goal for that person? How do you want them to change as a result of this movie being made? That's a big question. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just quickly interject. The GoFundMe was for a PhD fundraising and independent research. So I just have two separate
Great.
ventures. And I think it's important for me to highlight that because that's a bit where the benefit is felt more by myself doing the research than the person donating. So I like what you were saying there of, what are they? Why would they donate? That's what I was struggling with because I'm limited and like GoFundMe isn't like Kickstarter where you can give perks. So there isn't even that. So yes,
Yeah.
why would they? I didn't
Well,
know.
look, Melissa, this is great stuff, and I actually don't think that there's much of a difference between selling, let's say, that your research or, starting a startup or anything like that in terms of the audience, in terms of getting support from an audience. And I do think that perks are great, but let's face it, that's like the lowest form of gratification for an audience, right? Okay, support me, you'll get a free shirt, right? I mean, most of us don't want a bad shirt that's made out of cheap fabric that we get in the mail from somebody that we don't know. This is not what's going to push people. The question is, what is the mission that is relevant to the person who is going to support you, and how can you harness them into that mission? And the answer to that is emotional. This is the real difference between, let's say, most of the things that you find online, mission statements and all that stuff. The answer is an inferred emotion. What do the people need to feel in order to support you? And to answer this question, what we would do, let's say that we do a one-on-one. What we would do is we would get a little bit deep into what your goal is, what your vision is, what your story is really, and see how we can express that in a way that people actually understand what you're doing, because I'm sure it's good for the world and it's something that should exist. And we need to make it relevant for the people who are listening to it and say, yes, I want that to exist and it's going to make my life better. Not because of a shirt, because that's irrelevant, but because, let's say, the cost is very low compared to anything else I'm going to do today. The cost of a coffee, instead of doing that, I can actually make the world better. How is that? And then, of course, picking the right audience is a big thing for that, because you can make the world better, but if you talk with people who don't care about that, that doesn't matter, and so on, so on, so on. So it's a kind of, I'm compressing a lot into a short amount of time, but it's all to say that it goes through asking yourself some difficult questions that it sounds like you already started doing. The method that I'm talking about will kind of go through that, and then ultimately understanding your audience better. And through that, I will just recommend, before letting Victoria ask her question, I will ask you, what did you support? What campaigns did you support? What research did you support? Did you give money, actually? What goals did you give money? And think carefully of what motivated you to do that, because 99% of the time, we don't do that. So what's the difference? The answer is somewhere in there. To be continued. Victoria, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, hello.
Hi.
Um, Thank you for hosting us today. My question is a little bit more technical, I think. If there's a possibility of an answer, that would be great. So my question is, how does someone start getting into the filmmaking industry? Because this is what has been my worst struggle after finishing my film studies. Like, if you have any tips or whatever it is, it would be much helpful.
Sure. So listen, to make it relevant to everybody, I will say that getting started in the film industry is no different than getting started into any other industry that is based on self-employed people, right? Which is difficult. There is no real door. You can't go to Warner Brothers or whatnot, knock on the door and say, I'm here. I've finished my graduate degree and I'm ready. The same thing actually exists in many, many other industries. And how do you get that? I'll tell you how it worked for me. And I was in Los Angeles. People told me, Los Angeles is a very difficult place to begin as a filmmaker. And think of other cities that have a big industry in them, that you are there in that hub, and that is where you want to work. It's the most difficult thing because you have supposedly 1 million people who compete against you. But I'll tell you a secret about those 1 million people. They're all waiting. Not all of them, but most of them are waiting. So if you decide to initiate you will already be ahead of about 850,000 of those million that are waiting for something to happen. And so now the question becomes, how do you initiate and what exactly that you do? Great. That's the next question. You have to do something. It's not going to happen to you. You will make it for yourself. And now you start thinking of the people who hire you the same way that we talked about this thing today. Why would I hire you? What are you as a filmmaker? Are you a director? Are you a cinematographer? What is the entry point into this thing? You have to know that, and you have to decide how you're going to do that and why would other people want you. And sometimes, especially in the beginning, unfortunately, it's your willingness to take the financial hit and work for free. But you're very good at what you do. So you find like-minded directors, let's say, to help them in their cinematography. And lo and behold, this cycle begins. It's a great cycle because work leads to work. In every field, work leads to work. If you're sitting at home doing nothing, that does not lead to work. But if you're out there doing something, it will lead to more work. So you don't need to answer everything right away. You just need that first step. If you want, Victoria, we'll keep talking about it. Of course, it's a big thing, but it's a question that's relevant to all of my students, and it's a question that's discussed a lot. Okay, sure. There is one more thing here. Okay, somebody's suggesting here. Melissa is suggesting Stage 32, and there's other resources, so that's a great thing. Any last question before we finish for today? And thank you so much for coming, and I hope that you enjoyed. I want to remind you that send me an email, follow up, and we can continue these conversations like Melissa and Victoria. That my unsatisfying quick answer should be a little bit more lengthy and we can have an actual conversation. Any last question for today? Great. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. See you, everybody.